You talked about a team that was once great and maybe isn't anymore. The Golden State Warriors, top of mind as we start to pick through the comments from Mike Dunleavy Jr. today on the Monty Poole NBC Sports Bay Area podcast. What did you make of some of the things he said, and how you feeling about the Warriors going into this offseason with about 2 months until the season tips off?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it sounded like the typical, it wouldn't be coaches speak, but GM speak. Hey, we're going to see how things play out. It's just a business, all the things that you typically hear about. But I mean, to the point that we were talking about earlier, I didn't necessarily think that the Klay extension was going to happen now. I wasn't sure about the Steve Kerr extension. But when you do look around the league, Steve Kerr's been an interesting case just because of the injuries that he's suffered, and you haven't really known how long he's going to do this. Not that you could ever envision a world with the big three and no Steve Kerr, but just because of everything that's kind of happened to him, you weren't sure. So I think the fact that both these guys are up and the conversations are happening now is a good thing. But it was similar to, is the Klay situation any different to Draymond last year when he came out around this time and said he wants the max?
Right.
And number one, didn't get the extension at the time, and number two, didn't get a max.
I think it's interesting, and it's a little bit different because of the nature of the contracts. Draymond had a player option, so there was that threat of Draymond opting in, Draymond opting out, and then becoming a free agent. Klay Thompson's just on the hook for, $42 million this upcoming year. So Klay's got a little bit more of a say in terms of if he doesn't get a contract, then maybe he's playing for his next destination, or maybe he would take a bargain now, a hometown discount, if that's the way you look at it. So I think it's a little bit of a different deal in terms of Klay Thompson. The Steve Kerr one, to me, is even more interesting because Bob Myers left. And so there's the feeling that, not that Steve Kerr doesn't want to work with Mike Dunleavy, and we'll play the sound here coming up on the other side, but it feels like Steve Kerr is at a spot where he either has to decide to coach through the end of Steph, Klay, and Dre, or decide that maybe now is the time to step away and call it a career, not a career, but call it good after this year.
Right. And Bob Myers stepping away maybe threw a wrench into all of this, because I think Bob Myers was a big part, as everybody knows, and they all wanted to walk into the sunset together, but you try to plan things out and doesn't always happen that way. So now Steve Kerr, he's probably looking at, okay, do I want to, finish with Steph? Do I want to finish with this big three? The chances of that happening, I mean, it could happen, right? And you would be very grateful if it were to happen, but I don't see Steve Kerr. There's no shot he coaches with the Warriors after the big three are gone. There's no shot.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that he would want to, and it just depends on how things are trending. If you get to the end of Steph, Klay, and Dre, and Kuminga has turned out to be a borderline all-star, and Moody is a legitimate.
Yeah,
I mean that would be the only way,
right?
And I'm kind of thinking in terms of like a dream scenario, but Steve Kerr took over the team at the beginning of the dynasty, and he won 4 titles, and Steve Kerr has won 9 of the last 28. In the NBA.
Yeah.
When you think about like what Steve has done from 3 in Chicago, he goes to San Antonio and he wins 2, and then he goes to Phoenix in the front office. They don't win. Then he comes here and he wins 4. He's won 9 of the last 28, which is a remarkable run from player to player to coach. And so what does Steve have that he hasn't done in the association? And if you're Steve Kerr and you're coaching Steph Curry, one of the greatest to ever do it, certainly one of the 3 or 4 or 5 best players in the game right now, how could you walk away from that? But if Steph Curry decides at the end of 3 years that he's good, and Steph's got so many other things that he could do in this world, if Steph is going to stop and Draymond's at the end and Klay's at the end, to your point, does Steve really want to pull himself up by the bootstraps and coach a bunch of 20 and 21-year-olds and try to make it a go again?
For what? For what?
For what?
I mean,
exactly.
It's exactly the same thing as we were talking about with De La Salle. When you are at the apex, De La Salle won 151 games in a row. When you're at the apex, the only place you can go is down. So Steve Kerr just coached the greatest shooter of all time, the greatest shooting backcourt of all time. He coached the team with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant on the same team after they won 73 games and won the regular season record. What person in their right mind would want to go back from that, right, and start all over? Now, the only person I can think of a little bit is Popovich, but that's really the only comp I have. And Popovich, he went out, they're able to get Wembanyama. I don't know what was going to happen with Popovich if they didn't get Wembanyama.
Right.
So, and even still, Steve Kerr with his situation again with his health, I'm just not sure he'd want to press the restart button. You save a game, Dibs, you just beat the game on your PS5 or PS4, whatever you got. I'm not a gamer, but I know they're out there. And now you want to just start all over. Some people like doing it. Some people say, I'm good. And I feel like Steve Kerr would say, I'm good.
Unless he's really driven by money, which it doesn't feel like that he is. Greg Popovich signed a 5-year contract worth an estimated $80 million. Monty Williams got a deal for 6 years and 78.5, which is about $14 million, $13 million per year. So Steve Kerr would be looking at that sort of value in terms of average annual to be the head coach of the Golden State Warriors. And if you are money driven, which I don't think that he is, and I don't pretend to know what his finances are like, but he's probably doing okay, having been an NBA player and now been a coach here for darn near 10 years. So if that's what you're looking at, and Greg Popovich is 74, so this is a lifer. This is a man who has spent his life as an NBA coach, and at 74, he signed a deal for 5 more years, which means he'll coach until he's just about 80 years old, assuming that he coaches through the life of the deal. So does Steve Kerr fancy himself as one of those guys? Yeah.
He's 57.
I knew he was just a titch older than I am. I remember when he was at Arizona, and I was just graduating high school, so I know where Steve is in terms of his life, and he doesn't have a baby like I do. His kids are all older, including Nick. Nick Kerr, who is now the coach in Santa Cruz. So does he want to get to a point where Nick comes up and coaches with him, and then maybe he has a chance to hand the baton to Nick if Nick is ready to be head coach?
I don't like the sound of that.
You don't like the word nepotism gets a bad name.
No, I'm not saying.
Are you saying that he's Team Nepo?
I'm not saying he's Team Nepo. I'm not saying he's not Team Nepo. Team Nepo also doesn't mean that you're not qualified, right?
Right.
Team Nepo just means, it might have helped. I don't know. It did not help. You can't say it did not help, but I wasn't even necessarily going to Nepoville. I'm just saying
it's a ville.
It's a
total ville.
I've never been. Have you been, Dibs? I've never been there.
No,
I heard it's a nice place.
My father was an industrial linens delivery driver.
Okay.
So if I wanted to deliver tablecloths and napkins to restaurants, I could have been Team Nepo. But I don't know if you can see this on the YouTube and the Twitch, but your boy is not known for his upper body strength.
Sure.
And I've got small hands. So it was never going to be. My father carried 60-pound bags of linens, fresh, soiled, all the rest of it.
Strong
he worked 10-hour days.
Yeah.
My father put in the work for our family, and I was never cut. I'm not cut from that cloth.
Right. That would have been a different Nepoville. I don't know if. Yeah, that's not the Nepoville I don't think a lot of people probably want.
Well, in the Nepoville that I was kind of into was my brother Mike, who we had on the air on Monday, and he's now gone viral.
Yeah, good for him.
Intentionally walking a female slugger from Canada twice. But I followed him into coaching, teaching and coaching, and I was an elementary school PE teacher, and I was a youth coach, and I was good at it, like my brother's very good at it, and then I found my way into radio, so I could have gone Team Nepoville, but I eventually chose not to.
Well, and that's the thing. And I wasn't even necessarily talking about having a problem with it being Team Nepoville. I was just saying in terms of the timing, unless it would be super Nepo, it's going to take Nick a while to, if he were to take the reins. It should.
Yeah, that's better.
So that would mean that Steve Kerr would be... But the timing doesn't add up for me, because that would mean that Steve Kerr, unless you're saying Nick is going to coach for what the amount of time that Steph is with the Warriors, Steve Kerr steps down and then Nick takes over once the new regime is there, which I guess is technically possible.
Maybe 3 years, and Nick Kerr was previously in the Spurs video room, and he worked in the Warriors video room. So he's not just, fresh on the scene.
No.
He's a guy who's coached, and he's done some things in the association before.